Welcome to Makeup and Monarchies. If you're new here, my name's Tiffany, and I am a cosmetologist, hairstylist, makeup artist, and lover of all things UK medieval history. This week, we're talking about Jacquetta of Luxembourg, who was mother to Elizabeth Woodville, the wife of Henry Edward IV. I find Jacquetta so fascinating, and I wish that she was talked about more. I wish we had more information on her. I mean, I did find quite a bit, but it's hard. I wish there was more, because she's one of them, man, that just is so fascinating. So that's what we're talking about this week. If you're new here and you haven't yet subscribed, please subscribe. If you liked this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you would like to know all the products that I used while putting my makeup on today, they're listed down below. Not only can you find me on here, but you can find me on Instagram, TikTok, and go give me a follow, because over on both of those, I do like on this day posts. So if it's something, like if something big happened, or case in point, today was I'm filming on a Thursday, but it was Robert the Bruce's birthday today, so I post about that. So with all that being said, let's just get into it. Hello, it has been a while, hasn't it? A month. It was the start of like summer for us, no school, and I was very wrapped up in watching the Karen Reid trial. Let's get into this. So I am talking about the mother of all mothers today, Jacquetta of Luxembourg. And honestly, saying the mother of all mothers, I'm pretty sure I'm on with that, because so many are related to her. So let's talk about her. So Jacquetta was born in either 1415 or 1416. She was the oldest child of Peter I of Luxembourg, Count of St. Paul. It's P-O-L. If I'm wrong, correct me. And Brienne, and her mother was Margaret of Bow. I'll leave the spelling of that up here for you. In case I'm off, then you know. Her family descended from Charlemagne and were cousins to the Holy Roman Emperor. Very little is known about her early years, but it's more than likely that she was raised in Brienne. There is next to nothing about her childhood. Her main language was French, but it's suggested that she may have been taught English in preparation for her marriage. At the age of 17, Jacquetta was married and betrothed and then married John of Lancaster, 1st Duke of Bedford. John was in his mid-40s at that time, and he was the third son of Henry IV of England and Mary de Bohun. That's how I'm pronouncing that. John was the brother of Henry V. He was also a grandson of John of Gaunt. The wedding was described, or is described, as that the Duke was happy of the marriage and that she was lively, beautiful, and gracious. Doesn't surprise me though, because her daughter was very similar. 2 months after the marriage, the newlyweds went to England and she obtained her English citizenship. It seems as though she was well liked because she was given the robes of the Garter in 1434. These are the same robes that we saw Catherine and Sophie wearing during Charles's coronation. So those are those long blue robes, because they also are part of the Order of the Garter. A few months after their marriage, Jacquetta's father passed away, and a little over 2 years after his death, John of Lancaster, the 1st Duke of Bedford, died in Rouen. They didn't have any children together, but she did keep her title, Duchess of Bedford, after his death, and also inherited a third of his main estates. Now, Jacquetta was the widowed aunt-in-law of the King of England and held estates in the country. Henry VI, son of Henry V, who Jacquetta is the aunt-in-law to, instructed her to come to England. She was still in France. Henry sent Sir Richard Woodville to France to escort Jacquetta back to England. However, it seems as though Richard and Jacquetta fell in love on their way back. Richard was far below Jacquetta's social status, which was an issue, and the secret couple ended up marrying on March 23rd of 1437 without the king's permission. Big no-no. So you're probably wondering why this is such a big deal. I'm gonna tell you. Jacquetta was the widow of Henry V's brother and was aunt to the king, Henry VI. The royal protocol gave Jacquetta the highest rank at court of any woman except for Henry's wife, Margaret of Anjou. Margaret was a relative of Jacquetta through both her marriage to John and her sister's marriage, Jacquetta's sister's marriage, to Margaret's uncle, Charles Dumaine. Jacquetta even outranked the king's mother, who was Catherine of Valois. Once Henry found out about the marriage, he was pissed, refused to see them, and fined the newlywed couple £1,000, which would now equal to roughly £950,000. So this was an expensive love match. Richard and Jacquetta lived in a manor house in Grafton, or at Grafton Regis, which was close to Northampton. Their first child was born in 1537. More than likely, someone was more than likely pregnant when they got married in secret. They went on to have a total of 14 children during their marriage. And their last child, Catherine, was born in 1458. Surprisingly, they only had one child die, and that was their first son, so second baby, first son, and his name was Louis. Their children are, or were, in birth order, Elizabeth, Louis, Anne, Anthony, John, Jacquetta, Lionel, Eleanor, Margaret, Martha, Richard, Edward, Mary, and Catherine. By the mid-1440s found the Woodvilles in a powerful position because of Richard's military career. The couple spent a considerable amount of time in France. In September of 1444, Jacquetta stood as godmother to the daughter of the Duke and Duchess of York, which was Richard Plantagenet and Cecily Neville. This was more than likely their daughter Elizabeth of York, based on the timing of her birth. I researched that a little bit to see who it would have been, because they had a daughter named Margaret too, but the timing wouldn't have added up. Elizabeth was born in 1444. And the ceremony took place in Rouen Cathedral. Funny enough, I'm filming this on Thursday, July 11th, and unfortunately, weird when this shit happens, one of the spires of Rouen Cathedral caught fire this morning. So at this time, the fire is out when I'm filming. It went out. So because of the relation to Margaret of Anjou, Jacquetta became a court favorite, having special privileges and some influence. Margaret was the one responsible for getting Henry to give Richard the title of Baron Rivers in 1448, becoming a prominent participant in the House of Lancaster. Margaret of Anjou gave birth to her first and only child, a boy named Edward. Jacquetta was present for Margaret's churching, which I'm gonna describe, I don't know if I'm gonna describe it later, but anyways. So a churching is when the queen or a lady of status has a baby, she's in confinement after the baby is born for some time, and then they have a church, there was a churching. So it's like the mother, or is presented back into society and is done her confinement. So Jacquetta was present for that. However, the country was in upheaval because Henry VI was in a catatonic state. I guess, is he in a coma? What was happening? Has anybody ever heard of this happening to somebody else? And he was out for like a year. So was he in a coma for a year? Crazy. Anyways, he did eventually recover, but the Duke of York and Margaret were at odds, as Henry wasn't fully capable to run capable of running the country, and the Duke was the heir to the throne after the baby prince. The problems got more heated, and so we enter into the War of the Roses. So Richard, the Baron Rivers, and Anthony, his son, Lord Scales, were ordered by Henry VI to gather men and take on the works at Calais. But before that happened, on January 5th of 1460, the Earl of Warwick, my most unfavorite person ever in the world, came to Sandwich where they were and took them prisoner from their beds. It's reported Jacquetta was there for this event, but the men were brought to Calais and mocked about their lowly births by Edward, Earl of March, Lord Salisbury, and Warwick. They were left unharmed. And after the York victory at the Battle of Northampton, which is around this time, the Woodville men were forgiven and released, having to swear loyalty to the York cause. After the Lancastrian win at the Battle of St. Albans, Margaret went to London to retake the city, but was locked out for fear of the pillaging her forces would do if they entered. So she now had the Scottish support, but the mayor of London, Richard Lee, sent out a delegation to negotiate with her. Jacquetta was part of this group as she was someone Margaret knew, was related to, and was one of the greatest ladies in the land. Margaret got word that Edward, Earl of March, was approaching, so she abandoned her plans and went back north. I had to do my liner. So in 1461, after numerous battles and issues between the Lancastrians and the York, Battle of Taunton was fought, and it was a Yorkist win, and that was when Edward IV, Earl of March, took the throne. He was crowned king, and Henry VI was captured along with his wife Margaret, and Edward fled to Scotland. Jacquetta's oldest daughter, Elizabeth, was now a widow, as her husband, John Grey, was killed in the Battle of Taunton. That left Elizabeth with their two young sons, Thomas and Richard. The story is, I don't know how, no one knows how true this is, but isn't it fun to think that maybe that this is what happened? Let those of us live, please, and just think that it just was a romantic thing. I do feel like it was, though. Anyways, the story goes that Elizabeth went to Edward to see him, to ask for her lands to be given back to her, because after John Grey had died, they were given to, or they were taken by the Yorkists. But there was some issue with her former mother-in-law, or the family of John, as well, but that's something we'll cover in Elizabeth's episode. So Elizabeth goes to Edward to ask for the lands back for her, so her sons can have it. Edward falls in love with her, or they fall in love, and they met supposedly under an oak tree, blah, blah, blah. So they end up having a private, secret ceremony, get married. So like her parents, they had the secret ceremony, private ceremony at Grafton Manor, either May 4th of 1464 or late summer of 1464. They were married. In attendance to the wedding was Elizabeth, Edward, Jacquetta, and a few, two other witnesses, may or may not be including the priest. The following year, Jacquetta played a big role in her daughter's coronation. It's said that Jacquetta appeared for the coronation as she carried shields that were painted with the figure of either Melusina or Melusine, which was a water witch that was described as a mermaid, or a female figure shown as a snake, or as a snake from the waist down. There really is no historical fact on this, it's possibly just historical fiction. It's kind of cool to think about, though. Elizabeth's first child with Edward was born on January 11th of 1466. It was February 11th of 1466. It was a girl named Elizabeth, and Jacquetta was one of the godmothers of the baby princess. Queen Elizabeth was in her confinement following the birth, and was reintroduced during her churching, where Jacquetta bowed before her. This was customary. A lot of people got all hot and bothered from this, but I find it endearing and that they stuck to royal protocol. Also remember that Jacquetta was raised around royalty, so she was well versed with what was expected. So I would find it more out of character for her to not do something like that, just because of how she was raised and what her life had been like. Very royal. So I think it's the fact that a mother bowed to her daughter, but I think it's a sign of respect. And her daughter's marriage meant the entire family rose to prominence and had power now. Richard was created Earl Rivers and was appointed Lord High Treasurer in March of 1466. Jacquetta became a matchmaker for her children. One son, John, which was, I think he was like number 5 or something. John married Catherine Neville, Duchess of Norfolk, who was around 45 years his senior. The youngest child, Catherine, who was born in 1458, I think she married Henry Stafford, Duke of Buckingham. She was 8 years old when she married him. However, the rise of this commoner family pissed off a lot of the nobility, including a lot of the Yorkists. The king's brothers, George and Richard, were 2 of them, because they were finding themselves displaced in favor of the Woodvilles. Another one was Richard Neville, Earl of Warwick. I did do, actually, my first ever video that I did on YouTube was about the War of the Roses. So if you want to go back and cringy watch that, there's information about this. I kind of started, I don't even remember, but I'll link it down below so you can go watch it. In the later part of the 60s, Warwick started to grow hostile while the Woodvilles continued to have prominence. In 1469, Warwick had had enough. He decided to rebel against Edward, along with Edward's younger brother, George, Duke of Clarence, and joined the Lancastrians at first it was to put George on the throne, but that was a no-go. So then they tried the Lancastrian route. I go more into this whole thing in that episode. I may do another one. I'm gonna have to rewatch it. There's a whole jumble here. It's a whole kind of clusterfuck. Anyways, Warwick joins with George, and they kind of get on the Lancastrian side to oust Edward off the throne and put Henry VI back on. So this was him living up to his nickname, the Kingmaker. Following the Battle of Edgecote Moor, Richard Woodville and his Jacquetta and Richard's son, John, were arrested by Warwick at Chepstow and then executed in Kenilworth Castle on August 12th. No trial was had, nothing. It was plain murder. Jacquetta was subsequently arrested for witchcraft by Warwick, or on the orders of Warwick. So I'm gonna back up the year prior for a minute to 1468. There was an issue with a man named Thomas Cook. Jacquetta wanted to buy a tapestry he had, but he refused to sell it to her. It was obviously turned into a story that he was arrested for this, but in reality, it's more likely that he was arrested because he was a Lancastrian. Basically a whole bunch of drama and bullshit, but it ignited hate geared towards her. So supposedly the accusation came from one of Warwick's men, Thomas Wake. He said that Jacquetta made figures out of lead to represent Edward and Elizabeth, as well as practicing black magic, or the black arts. I call it black magic now. Or it's a song by Little Mix. I mean, it's a good one too. It's a banger. Making a figure. It's also said she made a figure of Richard, Earl of Warwick, which, I mean, I blame her. He was a bastard. This figure, she was conspiring his death and blah, blah, blah. She did call on Richard Lee for help, which was the mayor of London. While this is happening, Edward IV was held captive at Middleham Castle. However, Warwick ended up having to release him, and the charges against Jacquetta were dropped, or they fell apart and they were dropped. So they were all blew up in Warwick's face. And this happened in February of 1470. But this event would come up again 13 years later, after the death of Edward IV. It's known that Jacquetta owned a copy of an ancestral romance titled Melusine, which is a figure that is associated with both the houses of Luxembourg and Lusignan. If you've watched The White Queen, you know this part was played up a bit, but this was actually a really popular book, and it was found in libraries of other high-born ladies. Edward was on his throne again, but soon he was forced to flee again, and this time he left the country in September of 1470 Jacquetta and Elizabeth took the royal children and went into sanctuary at Westminster Abbey. Elizabeth was towards the end of her 4th pregnancy. Henry VI was restored to the throne, but not for long. Elizabeth gave birth to their first son, Edward, which would become Prince of Wales, while she was in sanctuary. And then he would also become Edward V. We know how that ends, don't we, guys? So Edward came back to England, and the Battle of Barnet and the Battle of Tewkesbury ensued. Jacquetta, along with her daughter and grandchildren, were released from. Edward regained his throne after the death of Warwick at Barnet, and then the capture of Margaret of Anjou and Henry VI after the Battle of Tewkesbury, which was when their son Edward of Westminster, Prince of Wales, it's so jumbly here, died or was killed during battle. Henry VI died in the Tower, supposedly from a broken heart upon hearing the death of his son, or he was smothered by a pillow. I mean, we'll never know, will we? So Anthony Woodville received his father's title, now being the 2nd Earl of Rivers. Life was peaceful for some time for Jacquetta following all these dramatic, tragic events. Oh, that's better. Jesus Christ, that was awful. Elizabeth gave birth again the following April, another girl whose name was Margaret. Jacquetta became ill the following year and passed away in May 30th, or on May 30th, 1472. She was about 56, 57 at the time, which was an old age for women at that time. There's reports that she had a will, but there's no records of it, and her place of burial is unknown. Jacquetta survived 14 pregnancies and 2 wars. Her life was full of scandal, danger, and intrigue. I think she's great. I think she was a strong, badass woman. So I'm gonna go finish my mascara, and then I'm gonna do my lipstick, and I will be back with our fun facts for this episode. So I have quite a few fun facts for Jacquetta. My first one is there's no definite proof, but it's possible that Jacquetta met Joan of Arc during Joan's captivity at Jacquetta's uncle's castle. It's said that she was there at the same time, so it's possible that she met her. There's no portraits or drawings of Jacquetta, so we have nothing as to what she looked like. It's assumed that Elizabeth Woodville looked very much like her, but there's no proof. All the monarchs of England and Scotland since her death, excluding James IV of Scotland, have been descended from Jacquetta. How, you ask? I will tell you. So we have Jacquetta, who has Elizabeth Woodville, who has Elizabeth of York, who then marries, spoiler alert, Henry Tudor. He becomes Henry VII. So Jacquetta's granddaughter marries Henry VII. They have 4 children. We all know the main one, right? Or the most famous one, Henry VIII. But his older sister, Margaret, married James IV of Scotland, had James V, who had Mary Queen of Scots, who had James VI of Scotland, who then succeeded the English throne, or was the heir, supposedly, of Elizabeth I. So everything comes from her that we know, so she was descended from both Henry III of England on her paternal side and King John of England on her maternal side. So she had some really, 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 not only from France, but from England, she had some deep royal roots. So this woman was a force to be reckoned with, I would say. Wouldn't you? That's it for this week. I hope that you enjoyed it. I know it's been a while. It's summer and I'm dying in this room because it's been 90 degrees all week. It's been so friggin' hot. That's not running because it's super fucking loud, and it is what it is. So I hope that you enjoyed this episode. If you did, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. If you don't follow me on Instagram or TikTok, you can find me over there, same name, Makeup and Monarchies. If you enjoy this content and you would like to support me, or help and support me, you can head on over to buymeacoffee.com/makeup and monarchies and buy me a coffee. And I like Starbucks. So that's it for this week, guys. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you in the next one. Have a good one. Thanks, guys. Bye.